I understand people being worried about having kids, but people need to not fall for the personal responsibility bullshit pushed on us by conservatives and corporations. Exactly. The people telling you, don't have kids, use paper straws, that was invented by BP. You're falling for oil company propaganda, so you focus on your personal life decisions and not on the stuff that actually matters. The massive corporations that are doing the climate change. The governments, the militaries. That's what's destroyed the planet. You having a kid that you walk to kindergarten every day and then make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for is not causing climate change.
Let's mold in the Central Committee. Let's cringe in the Central Committee. Let's bog in the Central Committee right now.
So, chat, we had the IPCC report has been published, and it's not good. The Earth is warming faster than previously thought, scientists say, and the window is closing to avoid catastrophic outcomes. Yeah. I mean, the air in my state is poisonous right now, so I've been a doomer pill all week. This is exactly why I ain't having kids. We ain't going to be fixing this anytime soon. All right. If you don't want kids, don't have kids. I'm not here to tell you to have kids if you don't want to have kids. But don't not have kids because of climate change. That's some capitalism cuck behavior right there. That's some pessimist shit. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So think to yourself, man, the capitalists are fucking stupid and they're going to kill us all, but act in an optimistic way. Don't be a cuck to these people. If you're like, I'm not going to have kids because of climate change, you're really saying that we're going to lose. Get that shit out of here. Get that shit out of here. Yeah, if you're making the decision to not have kids because of, some reason, like you don't want them, that's cool. Don't be like, I really want kids, but climate change. No. That's some bullshit. Meanwhile, Hogs pumping out hella kids. I think a lot of young people are not having kids because they cannot afford to. Well, then I would like to help, that to change. This year, we got a child allowance for the first time in U.S. history. $360 a month for young child, $300 a month for older children. That's a nice little bit of a subsidy. I feel like it's empathetic. Think of the hell the climate is going to be in 20 years. What do you mean? We're going to win. And climate change is going to be diverted. How dumb are you going to feel when we win? And you're going to be like, well, Mike was right. Should have had that kid I can't have now because I'm old. A way to win is to lower the Earth's population, though? Nope. Because if you cut the world population in half, we would still be producing too much carbon dioxide. It's not a per capita problem. It's not a number of people problem. It's a system problem. It's not because we have too many people that climate change is happening. Climate change is happening because the systems that we have constructed cause climate change. Mike, I feel like in some states they are trying really hard to make laws that will help in the future, like Oregon and Washington, for example. In 2030, they will stop selling gas cars. Listen, chat. If you want the pessimistic degrowth, people, that ain't me. All right? That ain't me. I'm not that guy. I'm the guy of righteous anger, but I am not the guy of, we're going to lose. There's a million of those people. You could be those people. Fuck those people. I understand people being worried about having kids, but people need to not fall for the personal responsibility bullshit pushed on us by conservatives and corporations. Exactly. The people telling you, don't have kids, use paper straws, that was invented by BP. You're falling for oil company propaganda, so you focus on your personal life decisions and not on the stuff that actually matters. The massive corporations that are doing the climate change, the governments, the militaries. That's what's destroyed the planet. You having a kid that you walk to kindergarten every day and then make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for is not causing climate change. All right? Like, come on, man. Banning gas cars is not a realistic idea. I'm sorry. First of all, of course it is. But second of all, it's not the gasoline car. It's the net carbon footprint. Oh, God, I used footprint. That's BP shit. But the point is the net carbon of the total economy. So, for example, if you produce carbon neutral fuel, like through the electrolysis of water, right? And if the worldwide is 0 or negative carbon emissions, you can have ICE engines. It's just a systems issue. Are humans producing more carbon than the Earth can absorb in a year? If yes, system bad. It's not about the individual component. Like, there are certain individual components that will probably require some amount of carbon output, right? Like our breath. You're not going to decarbonize our breath. But the point is it in excess of what the planet can handle? And what is the total contribution of carbon for the entire world system? So if you hyper focus on one thing and say, well, this is an intractable problem, this one snub, therefore we can't do anything, you're just not looking at the problem in the right way. So, Mike, for example, what if we all stopped eating meat? Would that help? That would probably help, sure. Capitalists will have you standing naked in the field, convinced that you'll fix climate change while they pump oil into the sea. Apple Chips, the video game. Thank you. Passenger cars is 250 metric tons of emissions per year. Industrial production is 5,000 metric tons per year. So these are questions. I mean, so it's about whether we can. And listen, I'm not saying I have the solution to every sub problem in the climate. I just think that if you're sitting there going, I'm pessimistic, I'm going to like change my personal life decisions to something that's going to make me less happy. Nah. I'm not saying there isn't going to be some amount of like change in choices you need to make. But come on, man. I have a 14-year-old and I do have some worries because the future is looking pretty bleak right now. I just hope that we can change the course we're on. We are a one-vehicle family. I eat no meat. My partner and child have chicken about 3 times a week. I'm worried, but I believe we can make things better for the future. It sounds like you're doing everything you can. The next thing, you know what you need to do in addition to that? Political activism. All right? Or start thinking if nobody changes anything, then nothing will change. Well, Legion, I agree with you on that. Obviously, things need to change, but we should be focusing our effort not on navel gazing, but on system-wide changes. All right, so right now, the world is on track to warm at least 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in 5 scenarios considered in the IPCC report. Only the lowest emission scenario, in which carbon dioxide emissions declined to net zero around 2050, would eventually bring the planet below this key mark. The IPCC report comes just 3 months before the UN-led international climate change talks, during which global leaders are expected to strengthen their commitments to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. Although some countries have pledged stricter cuts since the 2015 Paris Agreement, many have missed deadlines to do so, and there's still a significant gap between what leaders are promising and what's needed by 2030. From a scientific perspective, every degree, every part of a degree, every half of a degree matters in terms of limiting the impacts that we see from climate change, said Co Barrett, the former vice chair of the IPCC. So at whatever level countries decide is what they're aiming for, there are benefits and there are consequences to choosing those limits. Dave Ree, the director of the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute, said world leaders must have the findings of this report seared into their minds at the November conference and take urgent action. This is not just another scientific report, Ree said. This is hell and high water writ large. As computing power increases, scientists are more confident than ever in connecting the dots between the climate crisis and extreme weather, which for some reasons, even at 1.1 degrees of warming, is already becoming unbearable. Michael Brine, a climate researcher at the University of Oxford, said that what's different about this report is that the effects of global warming are no longer in the distant future or far-flung corners of the world. We know it was coming, and now it's here, Brine said. A heat wave that killed hundreds this summer in the U.S. Northwest and British Columbia would have been virtually impossible without climate crisis, researchers found. It made Hurricane Harvey's devastating rainfall roughly 3 times more likely to occur and 15% more intense. Harvey dumped more than 19 trillion gallons of water on Texas and Louisiana in 2017, triggering devastating floods in the Houston area. IPCC says heavy rainfall that used to occur once every 10 years now occurs 30% more frequently. Yeah, this happened a couple weeks ago, chat, which was a huge floods in Germany. When I mean political activism, I mean everything. Globally, droughts that may have occurred once every 10 years or so now happen 70% more frequently. The climate change connection is particularly strong in the western United States, which is experiencing a historic multi-year drought and has drained reservoirs and triggered water shortages. What we're seeing is truly frightening fire behavior. I don't know how to overstate that, says Chris Carlton, supervisor of California's Plumas National Forest supervisor in California, who called this year's wildfire season uncharted territory. Charles Coven, a lead author of the report's chapter on global carbon cycle, said California has already reached a tipping point on wildfires. I don't think we knew where that threshold was until we crossed it, he told CNN. What the report makes clear is that the likelihood of crossing any of these tipping points is certainly going to increase the more warming that we see. With every fraction of a degree of warming, the effects worsen, even limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, which countries in the Paris Agreement determined was ideal to stave off the worst impacts. The kinds of extreme weather the world has experienced this summer will become more severe and more frequent. Beyond 1.5 degrees, scientists say the climate system could begin to look unrecognizable. Andrew Watson, a scientist at the University of Exeter, said the climate models used in the report don't capture the risk of low probability, high impact events. They'll become more likely as global temperature increases. These are events such as ice sheet collapse, sudden changes in ocean circulation, or catastrophic wildfires, Watson said. These known unknowns are scarier still. Cool. The roughly 3,500-page report is a culmination of nearly a decade of climate research by scientists around the world, and although the IPCC is considered the ultimate source on climate change, it tends to be conservative in its findings because of the way it's developed, by having hundreds of scientists come to a consensus not only on the research, but the language describing it. Monday's report uses the strongest wording to date in describing the climate crisis. Ice sheets are melting and will continue to melt. Extreme flooding from higher sea level will continue to get more frequent, and sea level itself will continue to rise well into the 22nd century simply because of the amount of heat the oceans have already trapped. At the same time, scientists are sounding the alarm. The International Energy Agency says human carbon emissions are on course to surge by 1.5 billion tons in 2021. The second largest increase in history, reversing most of the last year's decline caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. They were talking about the Gulf Stream we were talking about the other day, huh? Yeah. People can't even accept the threat of a pandemic they're watching happen. How will they respond to climate changes? Well, Rad the Reptile, why are people not accepting the COVID-19 pandemic? Why are people not accepting the COVID-19 pandemic? Because of conservative grifters, Fox News, willful ignorance, misinformation, cognitive dissonance, because it hasn't affected them personally yet. And the reason why people are not accepting COVID is not because it's not in front of their face, not because it's not killing people. They're not accepting COVID because conservative grifters and liars are allowed to spread their lies openly, and it's part of their cultural identity. I think we need to start reevaluating the value of having these people on platforms. And I don't know what the solution is to this. I mean, I have a solution to this, but I'm not in control. And you're right. Looking into the pandemic, looking into the fecklessness of how liberals are handling it, especially in the United States, versus how conservatives are literally feasting on the corpses of their own advocates in order to push just like an incoherent argument. The IPCC report is clear that the global leaders must cut greenhouse gas emissions now before deadly and costly weather extremes get even worse. But Barrett said a key message in the report is that it's still possible to prevent the most dire impacts. It really requires unprecedented transformational change. Rapid and immediate reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, said Barrett. The idea that there is still a pathway forward is a point that should give us hope. Cool, chat. Real cool.
It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change. That's the finding of a new study by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the most up-to-date assessment of how global warming will change the world in the coming decades. Environmental experts have called it a massive wake-up call to governments to cut emissions. 234 authors from 66 countries have worked on the landmark assessment. The report says global average temperature rise could reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 20 years. Now, that is 10 years sooner than expected. That temperature rise will breach the ambition of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement and bring widespread devastation and unprecedented extreme weather. This all comes less than 3 months before the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow in Scotland. Vital UN talks that will determine the future course of efforts to tackle climate change. And the UK minister responsible for delivering COP26 has released this statement following the publication of today's report. He says, "Our message to every country, government, business and part of society is simple. The next decade is decisive. Follow the science and embrace your responsibility to keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive." Our environment and energy analyst Roger Harabin has more.
Wildfires blazing through Greece and Turkey have horrified people in the region. The panel concludes we'll see a lot more fires as temperatures continue to rise. And rise they will as greenhouse gas emissions keep growing and growing. The increased heat will change weather patterns, bringing more droughts and more rainfall, researchers say. London was shocked to find areas underwater a few weeks ago. Rainfall patterns are hard to predict, but experts say Northern Europe will be wetter overall. At London's Hampstead Ponds, they've already had to raise and reinforce the dams to protect hundreds of homes downstream from the sort of floods expected in extreme rains that are forecast to come. The cost has been huge. We're already paying the price of ignoring scientists' warnings on climate change.
So this report states as an absolute fact that human influence is warming the climate. And that's a very stark reminder that it is our activities which are changing the climate and affecting these extreme weather events. And as the planet continues to warm, these consequences just get worse.
Ice in the Arctic is melting faster than many scientists predicted. That leads to sea level rise, which in turn increases coastal flooding. The seas will keep rising for maybe thousands of years because the ocean deep has absorbed so much heat already. Political attitudes are changing. The UK is getting electric cars. We need clean technology for home heating too. In the words of one leading scientist, we're not doomed, but if we want to avoid catastrophe, we have to drastically cut emissions. Now. Roger Harrabin, BBC News.
Valérie Masson-Delmotte is a climate scientist and co-chair of one of the IPCC working groups which produced the climate change report. She said the threshold of keeping the global temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius limit will be breached around 2050.
The report shows that in the next 20 years, global warming, the average temperature at the Earth's surface over a period of 20 years, is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius above the late 1800s. However, if we rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, if we can reach global net zero CO2 emissions around 2050, it is extremely likely that we can keep global warming well below 2 degrees. If we do this, it is more likely than not that temperature would gradually decline to below or around 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, with a temporary overshoot of no more than 0.1 degrees Celsius. But if global greenhouse gas emissions remain around today's levels in the coming decades, we would reach 2 degrees of global warming by the middle of this century.
We're joined now by Tamsin Edwards, a climate scientist and one of the authors of this report. Welcome to BBC.
I think one of the things that is under-discussed is actually the higher emission scenarios, because there's been a continual growth in CO2 emissions. There's also been a continual discovery of more sources of fossil fuels. So the idea that, like, we're not going to be choked from a supply perspective. We are going to be seeing a lot more availability of fossil fuels, and we really have to constrain through regulation the use of these new sources.
News. I know your area of expertise is the oceans and sea level change, and in fact you spent 3 years.
No, we haven't watched John Oliver yet. We're going to watch it after this.
Haven't you? So it would be remiss of me not to find out more about that. What did you find exactly?
Well, that's right. We have over 200 authors in the whole report. We have looked at 14,000 scientific studies over 3 years. And I work on ice sheets and sea level rise, as you say. We don't do new research. We assess the robustness of the evidence. So, for example, for the Antarctic ice sheet, we looked at the range of possibilities of the future of the ice sheet and therefore its contribution to sea level rise.
And one of your findings is that the melting of Greenland glaciers is irreversible. Am I right?
Well, that's right. So there are different parts of, different ice regions around the world. We have the glaciers of the mountains and the polar regions, and we have the great ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. The mountain and polar glaciers are particularly sensitive, and we have already committed to further melting over the next decades to hundreds of years. We're also going to see more ice loss from the Greenland ice sheet over this century. And for the Antarctic ice sheet, there's a really wide range of possibilities. If we limit greenhouse gas emissions, we may be fortunate and have a relatively low contribution to sea level rise. But if we have very high greenhouse gas emissions and we're unlucky with how sensitive that ice sheet is, we could see very high sea level rise indeed.
So am I right that the message is there's no going back from some change? Once they've melted, they can't be refrozen, I assume. But there is a cautious optimism that this could be slowed or indeed even halted, or is that putting it too optimistically?
We think that the mountain and polar glaciers, the smaller glaciers, and also Arctic sea ice could have some reversible changes. So if we limit warming and eventually reduce temperatures further, that those could regrow and restore to some degree. The ice sheets are much slower to respond. So Greenland and Antarctica will keep responding for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And combined with the warming of the ocean, which makes it expand and contribute to sea level rise, that means sea levels are going to remain elevated for thousands of years.
I was very struck by what Inga Anderson said, the executive director of the UN Environment Programme. She said, scientists have been telling us for over 3 decades of the dangers of allowing the planet to warm. The world listened but did not hear. And I wondered, do you think government and people will... It's a difference, isn't it, between taking any notice of this and doing something about it?
Of course. I mean, speaking personally, I do sense a real shift in the conversation over the last few years. But I think what this IPCC assessment report shows, it's much more comprehensive than ever before, assessed more of the scientific evidence than ever before. Obviously, the timing with respect to the COP26 meeting later this year, it really shows that if we do have immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, we can still limit warming to 1.5 degrees above the sort of late 1800s, as we've heard, without much overshoot, and eventually go to lower warming again. But if we don't enact the policies and pledges that we already have in place, and in fact, if we don't make those stronger, then we won't meet that target.
But what are your conclusions about reducing those greenhouse gas emissions and keeping temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels? Can it be done?
Well, this particular part of the IPCC report is called the Working Group 1 report, which is around the science of climate change. And so we looked at different scenarios of emissions and what that would mean for climate change. What we need to look out for next year is the third working group, which looks at mitigation. In other words, where are those emissions coming from? What are the different pathways to cutting those emissions? So that will give much more of that detail about exactly the how of cutting emissions. Whereas what this report is doing is showing the implications of very low emissions or medium, intermediate emissions or very high, what that actually implies for the extreme weather, for the sea level rise and other changes in climate.
No,
I think one of the things that is underappreciated about these IPCC reports and the reports overall is is the presentation. There is billions of dollars being spent to undermine these facts. And like, I want to understand the logic here, the very high emission scenario, having emissions go down. Is this like the economy starts to collapse from climate change? Mike, the planet has been warming us for years. Just recently, it's opened a portal to hell in the ocean as flooded places haven't seen a flood in hundreds of years. Conservatives will still deny it to the very end. Well, I think that conservatives are starting to do the pivot toward it's happening, but China is doing more emissions than us. And India and China and India, they're the countries we have to control. And if China and India are not controlled, then why should we control ourselves? Why should we hurt our own economy? If we became carbon neutral, we're just going to cuck ourselves while China and India are doing whatever they want. That's the conservative argument that they're going with. Is like, even if we get rid of all our carbon, it won't matter because China and India are doing it. And they're going to try to, that's going to be their argument. Which is, yeah, it's bad, but it's worse for us, for climate change to happen and for us to hurt our economy. That's a conservative talking point. We do politics here every morning starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch. We're the morning guy. The morning politics guy. Politics Frogs in every single day, same time, 10 a.m., day in, day out, and we carry you through your morning and early afternoon politics needs. And if you need more, Mike from PA, we have a YouTube channel. We talked about suburbs, the My Pillow guy, Ted Cruz. We talked about DSA. Amazing. Making fun of Tim Pool. Amazing. Look at all of these amazing videos. Get in there, watch them. We have me on Twitter. You got to follow me on Twitter, chat. I'm at 20,614 subs. That means I got like 40 followers on Twitter in the last day. You can do better than that. You can do better than that. Go follow us on Twitter. And of course, join the Discord, where we have an incredible community of left-wing streamers. We have left-wing community. We talk about the stream. We talk about politics. There's gaming content. It's a really awesome, supportive place. Direct action, mutual aid, and you can just let off some steam. And also, you can help produce the show. One of the things I do is I look at the links that are put into the news content suggestions chat room on the Discord. Join the Discord, come hang out, and maybe what you want me to talk about will be part of the next show.